Hello, yes, welcome everybody. Let me just add my words of welcome to you all for coming. It's a great joy for me to be here today, I confess. This event stemmed from a conversation I had with my friend Chris about 8-10 weeks ago, I suppose. We're both from Glasgow, we're both very proud of what Glasgow has done over the years, and it seemed terrific that the COP conference was here, and a terrific opportunity for us to get together with all these great people and have this event. So I'm grateful to Chris and all the team that put this together. So there you go. The FM spoke about the Rotunda. It's a terrific venue. It's been very much at the heart of a lot of what Glasgow's done over a number of years. Curiously, my working journey started here. My first proper job was at the Glasgow Garden Festival about 30 years ago, and the Rotunda was very much the heart of the Glasgow Garden Festival. People may not know, but it was the ice cream shop. So it was very much the centre of everything that happened, and I hope today that the conference we have at least plays its part in being something that is the centre of Glasgow. So, welcome. I'm delighted to be joined by what I regard as an enviable panel. People from different sectors, and I hope that will bring a different piece of insight from each of their different experiences in terms of what we do for offshore wind. So, just starting on my right, I'm joined by Sonia, who is the VP of Offshore Wind for Equinor. People who've seen Sonia speak before know that she delivers a very quality and very direct message, so I look forward to further from that from Sonia. Mariangela Molanconi, who's joined us remotely. Mariangela, can you hear us? Can you speak?
I can hear you very well. Good morning, everyone.
Good. So unfortunately, Mariangela couldn't join us personally, but I was delighted to see that as a result, especially yesterday, she bought 20% of the Dogger Bank offshore wind farm for 140 million, which I regard as considerable compensation for not appearing in the room. So I think we can forgive Mariangela for that. Thank you, Mariangela, for joining.
Thank you, Cameron.
I'm joined by Mark Becker, a long-standing leader in our sector. He's the CEO offshore for, let's be honest, one of the biggest players in the game, Seagrey, a huge part of what we need to do going forward. So Mark, thank you for making the journey. Great to have you. And lastly, but certainly not least, my friend Andrew Jameson. I think he was introduced as leading what is probably the world-leading innovation centre, which I think makes him probably the world-leading innovator in offshore wind. So it's great to have you join us, Andrew. Thank you very much. I think I'll just start briefly by summarising, I suppose, the key challenge that we've come up against. How can you follow the likes of Tim Lord? We haven't seen anything yet, he said. He said, we've been burning stuff for 500,000 years, and we've got 30 years to change it. There's little you can say to address that challenge. But putting it into more specific numbers for us, that means that we have done something like 2% of the offshore wind capacity we need to do in the last 2 decades, which means we've got to do 98% of it in the next 3 decades. You are talking, as Tim said, of something like 1 gigawatt of offshore wind every 10 weeks. And it nearly killed us building 1 gigawatt project at Hornsea. I mean, Benj is here. You know, that was a 10-year journey through planning everything, and that took the better part of 10 years. And we've got to build a gigawatt every 10 weeks. I think that kind of brings it into focus. And the big thing we have to look at in terms of the commitments we make is how do we put in place the policies that we need. The policies we've had before have been a help. They've taken us to where we are, but we need that step change. So I hope that as we go through the panel today, we can talk a little bit more about the policies that we would like to see as an industry, both in this country, but also abroad, and look at it sector by sector to see what should we do, and hopefully come up with a set of key messages that we can take away for the next year or so. So the question really is what's next? So I think if I just begin by taking a few minutes and ask each of the guys to kick off, to give a wee summary of their organisation's commitment to offshore wind. And then I'll just talk a little bit more about how that new policy imperative might take them. So Mariangela, if I could turn to you. Eni is Italy's largest company, and you have significant political reach across the globe. And we know that, Eni, you're back. And we know that Eni and other majors are looking to accelerate that transition to offshore wind. So maybe you give us a couple of minutes from your perspective, just an introduction of Eni's targets, and how you see Eni accelerating that transition to offshore wind that we need to see.
Thank you very much, Cameron, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me today. I'm delighted to attend this very interesting session and share views about what offshore wind can really do to support the net zero target So just a few introductory words about Eni's commitment in the Energy Transition Challenge. Eni is an international energy company aimed to become carbon neutral by 2050, which implies that we want to provide fully decarbonized products and services to our customers by that date. As part of our strategy, we have decided this year to merge our renewables and retail businesses with the idea of becoming even more integrated along the value chain from the generation all the way through the energy sales to the end customers. And we have relaunched our growth target. In terms of renewables, Eni aims to reach more than 6 gigawatts by 2025, 15 gigawatts by 2030, and 60 gigawatts by 2050. And we want to achieve these targets by promoting multiple sources and technologies. Offshore wind is one of those, certainly, and it's a growing segment for Eni, as it is for many of our peers. We started our journey in the offshore wind effectively in 2020, so pretty recently, with the acquisition of a 20% stake in the Dogger Bank A and B project in the UK. And we have just announced an agreement to enter in Dogger Bank C as well, the third phase of the world's largest wind farm under construction. And for Eni, being part of such a great and innovative project is really a fantastic opportunity to accelerate our growth in the sector, to contribute in the UK race to net zero, and to gain further skills thanks to the collaboration with two of the most experienced industry players, our friends at Equinor and SSE Renewables. Dogger Bank is a groundbreaking project, certainly, that is pioneering new technologies in its delivery, and will be the first project to use the largest commercially available turbines operating in the world, the 14 megawatt GE Heliad X. And due to its distance from shore, also the first UK HVDC connected wind farm. Furthermore, Dogger Bank is being instrumental for the development of the UK offshore wind supply chain, which is great. And in parallel with that, we have also started a number of new ventures to pursue greenfield development and to participate in the upcoming tenders for new acreages. I'll mention a few of them. We have recently participated to the ScotWind bid together with our partner Red Dog Power, as we believe Scotland has really a great potential. We are working to get prepared for the upcoming tenders in Norway with our other partners through our affiliate Vargron. And we have recently qualified for the French South Brittany tender and working on a number of several other opportunities in the market, with really the aim to grow our pipeline in line with the long-term target that I mentioned earlier. And I'll stop here for the time being, and back to you, Cameron. Thanks.
Thank you, Mariangela. Just one point as we pick up on that. I mean, Eni obviously led the world in creating the oil and gas landscape. In terms of the decarbonised system going forward, what specifically do Eni need to see from governments to make the kind of investments and to create the kind of company that was created all those years ago by the one man that kicked off Eni?
Right. Just first a comment on offshore wind. We know it's a sector with significant entry barrier, but we believe that Eni, as well as the other measures, can really deploy several competitive advantages to accelerate their growth, which are namely decades of experience in offshore and floating projects with a lot of similarity with the offshore wind, management of complex supply chain that we know may be an issue in certain cases, ability to work in partnership, which is key for successful implementation of projects in the long term, and last but not least, financial strength. We mentioned this earlier. The ability to deploy and attract the necessary capital is also one of the key ingredients. Furthermore, we are used to invest significantly in technology, as most of our projects are in the technological frontier, for example, of the floating offshore wind. We'll also talk about this, a technology that can unlock potential in deep waters area and seabed, challenging seabed conditions, and also open up new market opportunity in new regions like Mediterranean countries, for example. So these are all strengths that are important to remember that can contribute significantly to the global challenge, but all this won't be enough without adequate support and directive from the government. So I would mention three aspects in particular, which to me are key in order for the offshore wind industry to scale up. Number one, a clear and stable regulatory framework, ensuring the right incentive to investor and supplier to promote capacity and infrastructure development on one side, and sustainable costs for the society and the community on the other side. Number two, support to innovative technology. Technology is key, is available, but in many instances there is a cost gap to bridge to move from pre-commercial to commercial stage, which needs regulatory and policymaker support, and I'm sure Andy will tell us more about this. So innovation is fundamental, and also to make sure that environmental friendly solutions are prioritized compared to low-cost options. And number three, timely grid solution to be planned and implemented as part of the national plan for offshore wind development, as well as greater interconnection solution between different partners.
Mariangela, thank you very much. That was very helpful. Thank you for your innovation. I think we'll pick up particularly on point 2, innovation, technology. Where does the cost come from? Sonia, I think that brings me rather nicely to yourself. Equinor is, let's be honest, probably the world's largest floating offshore wind developer, the world's leader. And I certainly thought floating wind was a little fanciful until high wind went up, and then I realized that it wasn't. And I suppose the big challenge really that we all saw was coming up with sufficient funding, sufficient balance sheet, sufficient drive to make something of that scale happen. So I'd be intrigued to know just how you see floating wind now. It was fanciful until recently. The resource was enormous. I think, what do people say? We could power the world 18 times over with floating offshore wind quite comfortably. So moving on maybe from Mariangela's point, tell me a little bit about what Equinor sees floating wind doing and what the challenges are and how we can overcome them.
Yes, and thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really looking forward to engaging in this conversation. I think what Equinor has shown, and it's a company that will be 50 years next year, so it's a company grown out of a base in Norway, and it was built originally to ensure that the energy buildup of oil and gas was also delivering back to society. But it's since then explored many other geographies and has a very strong base here in the UK. We have the Aberdeen office with more than 500 people and very much linked to oil and gas, but now also our offshore wind. And as mentioned by Mariangela, it's the Dogger Bank, of course, is the very interesting project we're developing now, and when it's in operation, 3.6 gigawatts of one wind farm. It's going to be quite exciting to operate. We've got the Dudgeon wind farm and Sheringham Shoal, and we also have the Hywind Scotland, which is outside Peterhead, so very local to here. So what we've shown as a company, we've proven that floating can work. We started with the Hywind demo in 2009. That was with the world's first floating turbine. So I think that was the first time people say, oh, is it really possible? And then with the Hywind Scotland, it was scaling it up. So from the 2.3 megawatt turbine, Siemens, that was then, and I think still is, the best performing 2.3 megawatt in Siemens fleet. So proving that floating doesn't just work, but it actually is enhancing the performance of a turbine. The Hywind Scotland turbines are 5 turbines with 6 megawatt each, direct drive turbines, again from Siemens. And now we're developing the Hywind Tampen, which is 11 turbines of 8 megawatt each, Siemens. Good to have you next to me. It's stepping up the scale, but what's also exciting is in this instance, we're not delivering to the grid, we're actually balancing the production of electricity with the demand in oil and gas installations. So 4 installations will reduce their gas turbine consumption to produce electricity and use wind instead, and that is the world's first again. So I think what we've proven as a company is that we are very technology focused. We've always been driven, a strong engineering muscle, and it's been about finding solutions to the challenges that we see, but it's also about dreaming and being, thinking big enough. So innovation has always been the core, and that is what we've done. We're very technology agnostic, so we're not kind of linked to one solution more than the others. We're trying to always ask the question, what is the actually optimal solution? So that's one of the reasons why we just highlighted that we introduced another floater concept, which is the the Equinor Wind Semi, which is perfectly designed to simplify further what we think is the best way to scale, but also more optimum for ports around the world. So making it viable for local content in a much better way than what we've seen with the SPAR, which has, of course, a very challenging demand with the port facility when you're actually building it. But what we do is we have ambitions on investment. So innovation cannot just be ideas, it needs money. The Hyven demo was an engineer or two engineers coming up with the idea, and then the company putting in funds for 8 years before actually getting it into the water. So it's that ability to also put funding behind the ideas that's key. And we have committed to invest $23 billion to renewables the next 5 years. So it's not just about the activity, and as we heard earlier, the money is there, so if that isn't really the challenge. But what we see, which is important, is scale. And the reason why we're driving for scale is because we've seen what scale can do, and especially around the fixed bottom market and how that has driven the innovations and the cost reductions. And what we've seen from that perspective is that we can, in floating now, very much piggyback on that. So we don't need a different type of turbine. We've shown that we can use the same turbine as being used, so offshore wind turbine more than just a fixed bottom or a floating turbine. But the difference between the floating concept is, of course, the floater itself and how you secure that and how you improve that. And the areas we see, there are still possibilities to go further and reduce costs even more. But working with the local supply chain is the key to really drive that improvement, because you need to find what is it that you can do best in Scotland. And that can then drive that further and scale that innovation. And we know from our oil and gas arm that Scotland has a lot of really strong capacities and capabilities, and they've been part of what we've been working on so far. Well, the critical piece with innovation is that it also requires risk, and you need to also be able to say when things aren't going to work and it's not going to fulfill. But for floating, it's extremely important for us as an industry that all the players succeed. And that's also one of the reasons why we share our data through the Order Catapult. And we discussed this 2 days ago, how important it is for the industry to collaborate. And we think collaboration is key, but it will require a different way of working together. And that is something that we also think we can help and bring to the table on how to do that.
Thank you very much, Sonia. That's fascinating. Thank you. One thing I think, just to pick up, you talked about there's a huge amount of funding available, and I get that. There's money sloshing around. People talk about this. But do we think there is money to fund the first 300 to 500 megawatt projects? Is there a way, because they're not yet cost competitive. They're close to it, but they're not yet cost competitive. They're not going to be able to get sufficient revenues. Is there cash? Is there, we're not yet proven all the different points that we need to prove. Is there cash available to do the first 4?
For the projects we've seen so far, so if I'll go now to the latest project, the Hywind Tampen, it is being funded through the carbon tax that Norway has, which is it's a tax system that's been around for a long time, driving actually the change in the Norwegian economy towards the low carbon and the zero carbon. It also has support from the government, because there is this need to see that the technology is a way forward. So I think there needs to be this balancing between the next project, and for Equinor, we want the gigawatt projects, because we think that will drive the necessary scale to get the cost down. And the funding isn't the challenge, but it's putting up the framework to what do you actually want to succeed upon. The CFD system has been really instrumental, that was talked about earlier, to drive the projects forward, but it is also potentially designed for cost purely, and cost reductions and optimization. So what you do need to tweak and look at, it could potentially come at the expense of collaboration and local content. So I think finding that balancing act on, because it's not just about how you fund, but it's what do you expect that to then deliver to you. Because if you then get local content, you will also get more value out of every investment that you do. So the regime of how to do this is almost there, but we would like to collaborate at least with authorities to find what could be the best way to succeed. But if you go to those 200 megawatt projects, you will not get the cost reductions you're after. You need to go to the gigawatt projects, because we saw this when we were developing Hive in Scotland. You know, we came to the local supply chain and we said, you know, we want 5 of this. And they say, well, actually this drives, I need to invest this kind of amounts in order for me to develop this kind of solution. And the investment were many times more than the revenue from 5 turbines. If we come with 60 turbines, it's a completely different picture. And that's why we think scale is so important, because that builds the supply chain and it gives that ability to properly take the leap of faith and believe that this is not just going to be the one-offs, but there is something coming at the other, and then there's more projects coming on.
Thank you. I think we'll come back to the scale point. I mean, it is interesting. I think this country probably perceives that there will be 200 to 300 megawatt projects next. I think, you know, we see the Celtic Sea round, people targeting that kind of size, and I suppose from what you're saying, maybe we should skip it.
I think you'll have to support it quite heavily, and is that what you really want? Or do you want to potentially drive it further down with bigger scale, potentially giving you less of a margin you have to cover?
I think that's quite a fascinating point, actually. Might come back to that, I think. I'll turn to you now, Mark, I think, if I may. Thank you very much, Sonia. It was grand. So Seagate obviously is by far the world's largest WTG offshore manufacturer, and for the last 20 years it's been a pretty tough ask, I think, hasn't it, being an offshore wind turbine manufacturer? It's not been easy. Many have failed, and I think, as we heard this morning, margins are very tight. So I'm sort of intrigued to hear from you as to whether you think the development community and other people and government should do more to help those in the tier 1 bucket who seem to have had to pick up the vast bulk of the bill for both R&D, early stage demo, and getting machines up to the scale they need to be. So Mark, maybe your comments around Seagate, its outlook on the sector, and what policies and what other things the developers can do to help make this happen.
Thanks. First, I have to disagree. It wasn't difficult. It is a pleasure to be actually in the offshore industry. I mean, I love nothing more than seeing the turbines finally installed, seeing the work done offshore, seeing, for example, on Hywind, the tremendous pictures when Saipem lifts the turbine. I mean, I enjoy that a lot, and so do a lot of my colleagues. And I mean, in SGRE we do, of course, onshore and service, but offshore is to the heart. We started the industry in 91 with the project Windebü, and we still have colleagues around who have worked in this project, and that is pretty cool. And since then we drive the industry and the limit of the industry upwards. I mean, we have several times probably installed the biggest wind park on the planet, and several times had the biggest turbine. But that's not about the single events and the number. That is about driving the industry and continue to drive this. And we heard in the morning a lot about the challenges on the supply chain and how to develop and people and so on. And actually, I'm not so much worried about it. It is a challenge. I don't want to downplay that, but that the market will deliver, because where there are opportunities and work to be done, the activities will happen. And I mean, there's also a lot has happened. The Windebü turbine 30 years ago are 30 times smaller, 30 than the ones we have now. And I mean, there is a lot of scale in that industry, and that drives a lot. So I'm not so much worried about the supply chain. That will work. I think we need to. The biggest worry for me is really at the start, which is the market. And we have also heard this in the previous panel. It's not so much targets. I think we have enough now. Yeah, I stopped also counting at a certain point, because if you add this up, it's just so ridiculously high. I mean, this is not the problem anymore. And that is a direction to go find. But how we get there? And I think at this point, we probably need to stop showing off, as you said in the morning. We need to face the reality. the first point is to make those plans or even a fraction of it real. So the biggest topic, I think, is not supply chain, it's consent. Getting those projects through so that we have something to work on as a supply chain and to focus and not to worry, okay, is it coming, is it not coming? So it's a consent topic at the first one. Then I think the second one is that there is a certain timeline for those projects. It doesn't help if we have 150 gigawatts to be installed in 2030 and exactly in this year. I'm making it a little bit black and white, but many countries have put the targets towards 2030, and all of a sudden there is where all those projects are supposed to happen. Can take Germany as a good example. They increased the target. They put 5 gigawatt on top in the year of 2030. I mean, this is from what we discussed also in the morning. Development is a supply chain. That's the worst thing that you can do because it's boom and dust. This does not work. So it's consent and piling the stuff up. And when you do this, then developers also have a chance to have more clarity on their projects, and they can commit earlier, and then cooperation and a lot of the things that we worry now about fall into place. And this is at the moment because of all that uncertainty. Timelines are squeezed. When the developer knows, okay, we have a project, then they need to award in the next 5 minutes. There is no time to cooperate with anybody and to optimize, and there's a lot to optimize. So that's actually what I'm worried about, not downplaying all the work on the supply chain. Don't get me wrong on this. This is a hell of a job. But this market mechanisms will deal with, and this industry will develop.
Thank you. So 3 things. I think consent. It's a subject very close to my heart, and I see Liz and a few others in this room who've spent half their life fighting with that particular topic, and I fully agree. Yeah, I suppose if I reflect back, I mean, probably one of the most challenging things I've ever faced is having a supply chain which is hugely motivated to come behind you. Supply chain that supports you, people locally investing, people doing everything, and you're the consent, and you're trying to get these things through. You're trying to get them through in a timely manner, and you're trying to explain why you can't. And you get this build-up of enthusiasm, and you've got supply chain investment, and you've got boards, and they're going to the board, and you can't deliver it on time. So I agree. I mean, the consenting challenge has always been significant, and I think it's probably timely to mention obviously your facility in the Hull and the Humber. I mean, when we were developing the projects that led to that, I guess, I think I did a timeline for the Hornsey project in 2010. I said we would get the consent delivered on December the 10th of 2014, and bloom, out the fax machine came the consent. And I think that probably helped significantly when working with Seagrey & Co. to plan the facility and to build up the capacity that was required, because you were able to plan fairly accurately and meet various milestones. So I agree with you. I mean, I could talk all day about consent. I won't. That wasn't the topic of the panel. But I do think
it is for the supply chain in order to go ahead. Yeah, this clarity. Can call it consent or visibility. That is what is really needed. And the example what you brought, yeah, there is some visibility. There is a project, and you can make a decision and say, okay, we built a factory, and this stock which at that time, back in time, looked not really brilliant.
Yes, it
and
did.
we invested quite some money there, but there was a path to go for. But if that path is not there, I cannot convince that abundant money on the planet to come to our door and make us self-realizing that. That is really the big topic for the supply chain, because there are other opportunities. We are, so to say, we are stuck. We believe in that market. I believe in the UK. I believe in Scotland. But there we have hundreds of suppliers that I need to convince that it is a good idea to invest into the offshore market.
Mm-hmm.
And they, of course, challenge me and say, okay, I see the targets. Where's the roadmap? Can you commit now that you are going to procure from us in the next 5 years this amount? And then I have to say, I think I can, but I cannot commit right now. And then they say, yeah, then I look at my other abundant opportunities.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge there where the two topics connect.
It's fascinating. I fully agree, my friend. I fully agree. So thank you, Matt. We might come back just briefly to consent. I think, Andrew, you'll probably end up touching it. So, Andrew, you're a final board leader, in my opinion, and I think in other people as well. You lead the leading innovation centre in global offshore wind. That's just a fact. And I think the UK has actually been very successful in implementing offshore wind policy You and your team have been very much a part of that. I mean, you can go back to the cost reduction framework, to the various studies that were put in place. And I think they have been absolutely instrumental in making the UK probably the world leader in offshore wind. And I think it's probably, you can trace it back to 2 or 3 key decisions, 2 or 3 key policies, and some very simple messaging. So maybe just a reflection from you, talk a bit about the catapult obviously, but a reflection from you of what the UK did that succeeded, and just how we changed that, because we have, as I say, only done 2% and have 98% to do in 3 decades. So what are your sort of reflections on what we've done right, and how on earth do we manage to do 98%? Because it's nearly killed you and I getting to where we are. How else do we do this?
So let's look at it another way. I'm looking at it as glass half full. When we started out 10 years plus ago, prices were, you know, £150 a megawatt hour versus wholesale electricity, I don't know, £40, £50, something like that. Nobody believed in offshore wind except the brave. Me and you were one of them, or 2 of them. And your point about certainty was amplified much more loudly then about, is there going to be certainty and commitment towards the growth and deployment of offshore wind, because you had everything else from cheap thermal, nuclear was always in the wings, and of course we were doing an awful lot more at that time of onshore wind, which was relatively much more cheap. But it was by sitting around the table collectively and a few grand challenges to the industry about how would we get real synergies in our activities to get costs down, that actually I think galvanised an awful lot of the main players and some of the others, but certainly the main players between the developers and the supply chain, including the turbine OEMs clearly, that we could crack that nut about getting costs very quickly down a trajectory that it was difficult to imagine. So I remember leading the cost reduction task force, and the challenge then was to get to £100 £100 per megawatt hour by, I think it was 2020, wasn't it?
Yep.
We absolutely smashed it out the park at £30 odd per megawatt hour at that time, at least in terms of projects that were in the pipeline. No one dared dream we were going to go from 150 to 30 in that time frame. And that's what I like to remind everybody now as we look at the challenges for floating wind. Is it possible? Is it possible, Andrew? Well, we weren't inventing space rockets using, you know, the rarest of materials to be found on the planet. It was basically a lot of sensible engineering, a lot of joined up thinking and real momentum to get the market going. And your point, Mark, about, you know, having the government stay with it and don't allow, you know, big wobbles to come in that would throw everybody off, and then we'll wait and see, that kind of thing. So I take heart that actually, is there going to be a reverse from any government on our ambitions for renewables, certainly clean energy? Nope, I don't think so. What we have to show is we can answer the call, and we're not going to get lazy and complacent about it, and, you know, prices start to get fat unnecessarily. So I think it is doable, but we've got to work super closely together. So innovation for me, because lots of people are, what is innovation? And the first thing I used to get when we started the Catapult some 8 years ago, oh, innovation's about invention, we don't do invention. I'm like, no, innovation is about taking risk out of what you do. And that's both at the process and the technology level. And it's about learning from what you did before. I said earlier on, look backwards to look forwards. Learn from what you've done before and apply it with real vigour for what you do the next time round. And that's what we have been doing. I'm saying now, we need to amplify that massively in terms of all of that innovation and coming together. One thing I will say, and I'm going to be slightly controversial, but you'll like this, pricing. It's great that we've got competition and prices have been driven well down, but you know, any engineers like me who have any kind of exposures to economics, you kind of ask the question, what's the long run marginal cost of this technology ultimately? Where should it be? Because we can continue down the real, you know, cost reduction journey, but as Tim mentioned, by squeezing supply chain to death, and it isn't really particularly sustainable. So I do think we've always got, keep competition alive, but let's also think about what is the true and acceptable position about our market offering in offshore and floating wind in particular. Because we lived for a long time with wholesale prices at £60 a megawatt hour set by CCGT, set by gas. Nobody blinked. And we were offering £30 plus in offshore wind. That's great, we're low wholesale price. Hallelujah. But we do need to go to deeper water. We do need to look at more sustainable materials in the supply chain and all these, you know, how we're making them biodegradable, all those kinds of things. Big challenges ahead. So I want to see, as well as competition, a focus on the true long-run marginal cost, allowing people to get the right kind of pricing, to cover off all the things we actually truly need in our ecosystem to have a sustainable industry that isn't simply about putting capacity in the water at the lowest price. It's also about doing the right kinds of capacity with the right kinds of jobs and the right kinds of resilience in manufacturing that we all need. So, and that means looking at everybody's jobs across Europe as well and how all of that plays and interplays into the markets we hear. Otherwise, because what I dread the most is just this constant relentless, it's only about price, and then we just end up importing things from all over the place. And just think about, you know, for floating wind, if you were to do the substructures and import all of that, now I know we've got a steel challenge in the UK, but to bring in finished goods on substructures and float those things all the way, you know, halfway around the globe just doesn't make any sense to me at all. So I think huge amounts of new thinking, real intervention, real innovative challenges are ahead of us. But I'm very much the glass half full because we solved some of those challenges before, and I know we can do it by working together.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Very good. Can I just ask you then quickly, because we're following on, I think, from Sonia's point, they see gigawatt scale floating, they don't see intermediate.
Sorry, say again?
So in terms of the scale of projects that we need to see for floating wind, do you see the need for the 200-300 megawatt size that I suppose most of us have conventionally thought? Or as Sonia says, should we be jumping straight to the gigawatt projects and just getting on with it, bringing down the cost?
So, interesting. So, I said this morning, so forgive me if you did hear this before. When we were looking at the cost reduction journey for the early stages of offshore wind, the big focus was on turbines. How could Mark get the confidence to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to create a new platform for much bigger machines? So there was a concentration of effort around all of that. Floating wind means a concentration of effort still on the turbines, but more so on the balance of plant. And the balance of plant isn't one single manufacturer or two or three manufacturers, it's lots. So I think the real question is about, if we're going to go to bigger projects, how do you solve that riddle in getting all of that infrastructure sorted to allow that kind of volume to come through? So I start with, I would like to see de-risking of technologies, and that should be at a smaller scale rather than going to the billions of dollars worth of a project. There are challenges around that, around in terms of, you know, what the cost of those demonstrations might be, the timeline to when they can deliver real benefits to inform the next phase of what we would do in projects, etc. And indeed their scale, because to many they are subscale and they want to do bigger things. But frankly, it was scale and volume of manufacturing that got us down the cost reduction journey for fixed bottom. You can only assume we've got to replicate an awful lot of that for floating wind. We need real volume built and bigger turbines. But there are a few challenges and barriers in our way that we need to overcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Sorry, do you want to come back on?
No, I think we're agreeing in the sense that we do need the large projects, and there are a few medium-sized projects already being worked on elsewhere in the world as well. So it's not that there is a lack of the smaller ones. There is actually a lack of the bigger ones. I think if Scotland really wants to lead, you want to make sure that you are at the forefront and not just following what's happening elsewhere. So I think there's a real opportunity to do this. I agree with you on the balance of plant, but the balance of plant side is also where potentially the opportunity lies. Because the top side, it's a standard turbine, and it's going to be competing actually against all the projects that are out there on the fixed bottom, which is already a huge pipeline where suppliers will have a lot of opportunities. So that's where floating actually has to be attractive enough to gain that pipeline. But on the balance of plant and on the floaters, there is real opportunities, cables. You have companies that do really great cables already, and that can be further developed. You have the capabilities within the mooring. We have, seeing one of the areas that maybe is not talked about enough is the substation and what needs to happen there. Again, I think there's real, opportunities. We keep talking about the turbines, but you need that part as well. And you can talk about floating substations, and you can talk about the subsea substations, which again we spoke about earlier. Oil and gas has a huge experience within the subsea, and we Equinor ourselves, we put the seabed compressor, which was seen as not feasible earlier. It was always put on top of a platform, but then we proved it's possible to put it on the seabed. And we can do the same, I think, as an industry now, also for really showing how floating can be a completely game changer, and not just only piggybacking on the fixed bottom improvements and what's going on there. So I think that's something to think about, but it will require big thinking. Like with the HVDC first for Dogger, it comes because you have potentially 2.4 gigawatts. So it is not just, you wouldn't build that HVDC for a small project. So it is a bit of a chicken and egg, but I think, you know, if you want to be bold, I think Scotland could be bold.
Fascinating, thank you. Mariangela, just briefly then on this scale point, you clearly have chosen to invest in a 3.6 gigawatt project and have a part of it, rather than take your own 200 to 300 megawatt projects through. Do you see, does the oil sector in general, do they see this need to just go for much larger projects and skip this middle ground that we did, as opposed to the rounds 1, 2 and 3 previously in fixed offshore wind?
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. I agree with all has been said, and I agree that scale is key. I mean, our decision to enter Dogger Bank is linked to many different aspects. One is the scale. Scale is attracting a lot of other aspects. Now, we mentioned the HVDC, the operating vessel that needs to be used for the project and so on. I don't think we will only look at the gigawatt project necessarily, and probably on the floating side, we are still midway. So I think floating will be viable very soon, but probably there is a path to go through, and we will have middle-sized project first before reaching the few gigawatt kind of scale, because we need to answer certain challenges that are still unresolved. And we also need the cost point. So we need to balance technology challenges with the viability of the project, the economic viability of the project. So back to the point I mentioned earlier, if there is support from the government, maybe the deployment of innovative technology can be accelerated. And if there is a cost gap, this can be filled out. And so the process for getting this concept out in the sea would be much quicker. All this, from my point of view, will require a big effort in terms of collaboration among the industry, but also across the countries. We have a very important experience from the UK that started very early. Now we are seeing a lot of interest in many other markets. Every country is setting its own target. We need to share experience, lesson learned. We need to socialize all the know-how and the data, because this is the only way for me to accelerate the growth and ultimately reach the global target of the net zero.
Thank you, Mariangela. Mark, just finally on this point, because I think it's fascinating actually, scale, because I think currently there's a lot of thinking among policymakers that you do need these interim projects. I mean, if somebody comes to you with a gigawatt scale floating offshore wind project in 7 years, 6, 7 years, is that achievable?
Yeah, of course it is achievable. I would say the scale is a time machine for the cost curve on floating. Our view is that we have enough of those demonstrators. You even share some of the data. It's proven technology, and my view, the real difference is then scale, because this enables to do things which you cannot do on a 3 turbine project, because it is all one-off. You go to a site which will not be changed, because we had heard that earlier, the revenue for the supplier is probably lower than the cost to change the key site or whatever it is. So it doesn't make sense. But if you have a big project that's all feasible, and that can be then the stepping stone for more. But more demonstrators, I don't think we need them. And also the 100 and 200 megawatt projects are nice to see, create confidence to those who still need it. From our perspective, not needed. We can go to the gigawatt scale directly, Then we of course need to solve the problem how to and where to manufacture the balance of plant, but this is chicken egg. Once the order is there, once this project is there, the market will find a way, because it's business, it's an opportunity. People will line up to make it happen. And then you have a competition of ideas and things will fall into place. Pretty confident.
Fascinating, thank you. I mean, I don't know what other people think, but yeah, in terms of policy and the way policy is going, I think that's something people need to get their head round. We need larger projects and we need them fairly quickly. And then let's de-risk technology as we do through, again, plays well into the messages we're hoping to get out for the Floating Wind Centre of Excellence. So thank you very much for that. Maybe just one quick question, which is, and then we'll maybe turn to the audience and see if anything else to pick up. And I guess we happen to have both Equinor and Eni on the panel, and there's a lot of debate in the press around the tipping point between when oil and gas companies will invest more in renewables than they do in oil and gas. So just to spice it up a little, when do we both think that oil and gas companies will invest more in renewables than they do, and I don't need to speak about your own companies, but in terms of general business, when do we think we will see that tipping point between more being invested in renewables than is invested in oil and gas? Mariangela first? Or?
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Well, I don't have a date in mind. I don't think none of us can really predict that, but this is a gradual process. So we are gradually investing more and more into renewable and green solution, and we are trying to decarbonize our activities. At the same time, oil and gas activities needs to go ahead for a while, and we need to find solution to make that kind of activities less carbon intensive. So we are working on energy efficiency, for example. We are increasing the share of natural gas within the portfolio. For Eni, it's already 50%, for example, and we are aiming to increase this level in the next few years. So all these action will be going in that direction. And on top of that, we are also working on solution like CCUS, for example, and we have in the UK a concrete project we are working on to address the GHG emission concern. So I think really this is something that will be resolved slowly, but we need to accelerate the process, and probably in the next decade we will see a transformation being completed. So what we have started can really reach a concrete result very soon.
Thank you, Mariangela. Thank you.
I can be very quick and save a lot of time. 2030.
2030.
So by
That's
2030, we will spend more than 50% of the gross investments in Equinor will go to renewables and low carbon.
By 2030?
Yes.
Well, Mariangela, you said a decade, I think, so we're all now fully agreed. You heard it here first.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's the horizon.
And you didn't speak first? No, very good. So there you go. 2030, that's the date that we're all looking for. Thank you, Sonia. That's great. Yeah, I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 5 or 10 minutes before we need to wrap up and go and have a nice lunch with Mr. Matheson. I hope it's a nice lunch. So I wonder, are there any questions from the floor that people would like to put to the panel?
One over there.
Christoph, my friend, how are you?
Just show it.
Go on in.
The debate around size of projects and the intermediate projects before getting big, I think we need to take a...
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. We need, if we're looking at the size of projects, and this desire clearly to move to large gigawatt scale is driven by getting costs down. However, partly what the point of intermediate projects is to help supply chain. So it's a more outward-looking approach as opposed to just focusing on electrons. And it goes back to the catapult work on stepping stone projects, which says start about 40, 50. We're seeing a couple of those, up to 100, up to 300, and then up to the gigawatts. So if we go straight to large scale, there's a danger we leave behind local supply chain. And that would be both here in Scotland, but also down, sorry, I'm from Simply Blue, I should have said, down in the Celtic Sea, where we're looking to build up a brand new supply chain where we don't have the oil and gas legacy. So I think it's important that when we talk about going to scale, we also think how to bring local supply chain with us. And that's why we need those intermediate steps.
Yeah, I suppose the question is, what nut are you trying to crack? Are you trying to crack supply chain, and is there a better way of going about that, or is building 300 megawatt projects the answer?
Yeah, and I think if we say for the UK government policy is we see loads of gigawatts in the water in the 2030s, is it supplied by UK supply chain, or is it towed in from the continent, which we see has happened quite a lot. So we are to get UK content into UK projects, we need those intermediate projects.
I'm guessing, Sonia,
Do you
you'll want to come
me
back on
first?
that. Yes.
Well, and you know, I will never disagree that you need projects to develop the supply chain. And the question is, what's stopping a smaller company to partner up in a bigger kind of collaboration to also be part of larger projects? Because I think this is, collaboration isn't just about two people talking together. It's going to be about joining forces in a different way than what you're normally used to. And in the gigawatt projects, you know the ScotWind process, potentially, I believe it's about 7 gigawatts of floating. That's part of this consent round that's going now. Only 1 gigawatt of that will ever go through, because that's the only goal for the 2030. So even if you have 7 gigawatts of potential project, none of them will be funded enough to actually go through by 2030. So you're max talking about a gigawatt, really. And the question is, will you do that in one go where you can scale and really get your supply chain going? Or will you do it in smaller chunks where you'll have a lot of potential companies participating, but will those be the solutions that can really take off and also serve an export market? I think what you need is both. So you need to have in the round for that gigawatt, you need to have an expectation or a kind of a frame that says how much you need to use the local content, because that ensures that there isn't going to be just a cost drive, but you need to find that combination. For Hywind Scotland, we had the anchors coming from Scotland. We could have found cheaper solutions elsewhere, but we wanted to have local content, so we went with the more expensive solution. And that's driven by the expectation by the government. So I think you can find those solutions. It's not going to rule out the other companies, even if you go for a gigawatt, but it will potentially make it easier for you to invest to serve a gigawatt than it is to invest to serve 10, 15 turbines only, or the scale that's coming. But there are already lots of those smaller projects in the making. So there isn't a lack of smaller projects. There's a lack of big projects.
Yeah, I agree. Andrew?
It's back to my point about learning, I'm afraid. None of us on this platform are actors in the infrastructure side of ports or manufacturing of substructures. We need to hear from them what's concerning them and what barriers do they need to see to be fixed, and how can we help them with that level of investor confidence. I maintain that's one of the biggest challenges we have to the success of floating wind. We've concentrated on the turbines, and Sonia said the turbines will be the turbines. There's a huge raft of issues about what would the contract structure look like, what level of risk are we asking people to take on, what level of pre-investments do they need to make so that they can be ready for the market, etc., etc. Our market in the UK is not designed to do that. Our market in the UK is cheapest first, come what may, and that's why we haven't had the strength in supply chain that we should otherwise be enjoying. So my constant call here is we've got to revisit that ecosystem. So I kind of half agree with Christoph, nice to do the smaller projects, and I totally agree, and I half agree with Sonia too. We need scale, because the scale is the thing that's going to get, we all know that. I think the big unknown is what would all of that kind of contracting and that other bit of the ecosystem look like, and what do those actors who would be asked to play a role in that, what are they saying about it? That's what we really need to focus on.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Just, of course.
Going on the GWEC and the looking at how to do this, and there are a couple of key takeaways early in the discussion, and that is the understanding that we need to have the collaboration so that as a developer we share the requirements early, so the supply chain know what to prepare
that's
for.
a difference to the ecosystem.
Yeah, so that
you
know what you actually need to do, and then
Absolutely.
we also need to potentially have not that extremely short deadline after you get a contract for difference, then you build in 5 minutes.
Too late, yeah.
Because that's where your challenge is. So if those two things, that could So it's not a dramatic change of setup, but just maybe having a slight differentiator, maybe that could help also scale.
I think, Mark, that comes back to your point, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't see a contradiction, because I mean the bigger volume, this needs to be the perspective, and then you can also put it in smaller chunks so that the supply chain has the possibility, as Christoph said, to come up with. Because if you want in 1 year from 0 to 100 big floating, that does not work with local. But if it's chopped into pieces but still handed out to someone as a bigger project, you get all the advantages. But this is, of course, then the ecosystem, how to organize this in a competitive environment. You've brought this up earlier. That is something which needs some guidance and a different framework than we used to have between all participants. And that's actually something where I pretty much appreciate oil and gas majors coming into, because the level of collaboration is it's different in that industry. They don't have a big problem to go together into a project and develop that, and that's from the first stage on, and that's different, and that will bring something, I think, to the industry.
Thank you so much. I am under strict instructions to be finished on time, which is very unusual for me, because I could talk all day, as Chris knows. So I think we've possibly got time for just one quick question, and then I think I'll ask people to finalise up. Anything? Christine? Anna, have you got a microphone for Christine?
Yeah, hi. I suppose I'm speaking as much as a mother as I am someone who's been involved in offshore wind for a very long time, and the need to bend the curve of CO2 as fast as we can. So we've heard a number of times today about this 1 gigawatt every 10 weeks, and there's kind of been a bit of a ripple through the room about that being a little bit shocking, but that's 250 20 megawatt turbines in a year, isn't it? And we've built out over 200 turbines in a year in a good year. So I suppose my question to the panel is, if you had a magic wand, how do you make sure that we sustain a high level every year? Back to your pipeline point, I suppose, what is it that needs to change to deliver that?
Well, Christine, I think that's a great way to wrap up. So let's do that. Let's just go around the panel very quickly and ask exactly that question. Start with, well, Sonia, on you go.
Yeah, and I think, the dream is to have that predictability. Unfortunately, pipeline is a word we keep using, but I think that is what's going to help us to do this in a very consistent way, because we don't want the boom and bust type of approach. The Hywind Tampen project actually came out of, there wasn't anything after Hywind Scotland. There wasn't any floating projects to build. So we created our own, where we're our own customer. So I think we need the predictability, but as you've said, it's not a challenge to do the scale. It is, however, a challenge to have that long-term vision, that it's not just about 2030 and then nobody knows what happens, but we need the 2035, and we even need to start thinking about the 2040. So that would be my dream. And then can I add, because there was this pasta question, and I'm half Italian, so I want to, can I just put my suggestion to what kind of pasta we're going for? I would go for spaghetti, because it's all about electrical wires.
You're very good, thank you. Quickly, Mariangela, then just your magic wand. I won't ask you to comment on spaghetti.
Yeah. On the question, back on the question, I think the quick answer is planning. So I agree. We know that these projects are all pretty long in terms of time to market, and there are a lot of obstacles along the way. So when is the right moment in which you can say you have secured the capacity, you can go and sign the contract and ensure that the capacity can be then manufactured. So planning is important, and planning will require an effort from the single developer and also from the regulators, because we go back to the permitting point. We need to make sure that certain risks are covered before committing.
Thank you, Mariangela. That's great. Mark, very quickly, your magic wand.
I'm boring on this. It's the predictability, as you said, because there are only two options. The one is the ecosystem is organized by the non-existing mastermind, that will probably not happen because that would be socialism or I don't know what. That's not going to happen. Hence, it will be the market, and then the market can only change if there's more predictability, more time to realize the projects, and then this will fall into place. Because thanks for this example, I use this actually internally a lot with a number of turbines, and that's why I said earlier we scale by the unit. This is feasible if there's a bit more planning horizon.
Thank you, Mark. Andrew, last word.
Learning, I'm afraid. Doesn't it feel like every time an application for a wind farm goes in, it doesn't matter if it's onshore or offshore, frankly, we're starting again on the learning process about the discovery of data and information and how many years it takes to analyse it. Why? Why does it take so long each and every time? There must be an accelerated way to, and I did ask another COP event, Marine Scotland, am I dreaming? And I said, could we just do a proper survey of the North Sea as an example once, and create a super database? And it says, here be dragons, don't put a project. Over here, yeah, that looks good. You've got a bit more to do to get the project over the line, final and plat. And the chap said, yeah, that's feasible. And that's the kind of thing you want to hear, that there are ways of innovation, really deep interventionist, different innovation that's doable, that could actually accelerate what the lady was asking about how do we get that kind of volume going, because you're going to need that kind of confidence that that pipeline that the developers are going to go is big enough and strong enough for you to keep investing and creating the capacity for manufacturing turbines. Great. And we need a lot more manufacturing capacity clearly for net zero around Europe and around the globe. So,
marvellous. Thank you very much. So I think, guys, that brings us to the end. I am on a very strict timeline, which I'm a minute over. So I could ask you all just to thank the panel in the usual way. Thank you very much.
thanks, Cameron.
And we get a break.
Well done. Thank you, Mark. Thank you.